Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, like you say, it's super nice to obviously get behind the curtain every now and again. I think coming up in the industry, we never really had the opportunity to sort of see behind closed doors as to how agencies sort of produce the work they do. So I think this really shines a nice positive light on that sort of part of the industry. Yeah, guys, without further ado, let me just introduce myself for those of you that don't know. So I'm Andrew Last. I'm head of design here at Motto. I essentially oversee and ensure our standards of excellence of every studio that comes out of the project, every project that comes out of the studio. And today I'm very excited to take you through one of our favorite projects from 2024, which is CloudBees. So without further ado, let's kick things off. I'm going to do a quick overview of what we're going to get into today. So first off, we're going to understand who we are as a company. We're then going to roll into who the client is and look at sort of the opportunity they had to move into this next stage of growth of their business. We're then going to show the two possible futures that we deliver to the client in the initial instance. So a little overview there. With Motto, the way we do things is we give two possible futures to every client that we sort of engage with. So two separate mood boards, two sort of real key ideas that follow through every single touch point. And then after that, we're going to get into those two side by side. So what we actually do is present like a bento box to the client of sort of all the different brand assets and put those two together and allow them to choose from each direction. So we've named that sort of revolution versus evolution, which is what the client sort of dug both routes. And then my favorite part, we're going to get into the questions and answers where you guys can really dig in and just pick my brain, ask the things that you may not have been able to ask. Like just really ask me anything, like go wild. That's what I'm here for. So without further ado, I'll kick things off with a little bit about who we are as an agency. So Mo is a recognized leader in branding and digital services. We specialize in positioning, scaling, and reinventing companies. Our focus these past few years has predominantly been in the tech and innovation sector. And the space we sort of work in within that are things like consumer tech. We focus around artificial intelligence. We do a lot of SaaS brands, Web3, creativity tools. We're getting into wearables and fintech, productivity tools, and robotics, which is sort of on the horizon. Super interesting stuff. A very innovative sector to be in as well. We start everything off as well with what is dubbed our idea worth rallying around. So basically, this heads up all of our strategic decision and reasoning. So this method essentially unites vision, culture, and brand and allows leaders and teams to rally around one core idea. And the result is a brand that's fully understood and driven forward by their entire organization. So we set this sort of North Star for companies whenever we go in, we figure out what their idea worth rallying around is, and that basically bleeds into every single touch point of the brand. So we kick things off, obviously, always with initial research and strategy, and we do everything from visual, verbal, strategic, web to internal and market activation. So we do a whole process for each client. Some of our more famous worth ideas worth rallying around. We've done work with GoodNotes, which is on every sort of iPhone in Apple stores around the world. It's pretty crazy to see our work out there. We've worked with Google, Virgin, and we sort of set a lot of strategic visions for a lot of these clients. But yeah, just an overview of sort of the ideas worth rallying around that we've done in the past for clients and sort of the breadth of those as well. From there, just a little bit about our process. So an overview of how we actually onboard a client. So we start with immersion and onboarding. We then move into brand strategy. We then cover verbal identity. So what does the client actually sound like and how do they speak? From there, once all of that foundation is set, we move into the visuals, so the pretty stuff. And then we fold into brand activation, so how it actually ends up in the real world. I skipped ahead there. I skipped ahead there. So actually, what we're going to do is we're going to just do a brief overview of some of our favorite projects of 2024. So at the end of last year, we actually did a 24 and 24 reel. This just shows the sort of scope in the innovation sector of where we sort of start to play around and really create some memorable brands. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off with a brief overview of our sort of 24 portfolio so you guys can get an idea of the scope of work that we do if you're not already familiar. So, super brief overview. I don't know if you guys could hear the audio there, but it was blaring in my ears. It's got a nice soundtrack, trust me. So from there, what we're going to do is we've talked about us and who we are as an agency. We're going to get into who the client was and the sort of opportunities around where we could take them forward. So CloudBees is one of the world's leading software development platforms and strategic cloud transformation partners for enterprise companies. So what they actually needed was sort of a brand for their new era. It was to take them forward into the future. So a little bit of background about the client. In 2010, CloudBees revolutionized software development with Jenkins-powered automation. Now, Jenkins is sort of the platform that all this DevOps is built on. So these guys are a DevOps operator. Now they have over 10 million developers and 500 enterprise clients. It needed to sort of move beyond its antiquated roots and really move into this sort of cloud development software that they're trying to pitch towards. So to stand out in a competitive market, CloudBees partnered with us to reimagine its brand and position itself as a next generation software delivery platform. So we took them through this entire engagement. You'll notice down here, it's the engagement is actually fast track. So that is actually a 12-week engagement. So we took them through this entire process in 12 weeks. So the entirety of the project was just over a span of 12 weeks. Super quick, but we managed to deliver the client with a super nice brand that they absolutely love. Just to get into things, so this is sort of an overview of what we actually did for the guys. So we kicked things off with a strategic debrief, a creative workshop, and we also did creative audit. So within that creative audit, we essentially take a macro look at the marketplace and understand where we can create some serious differentiation. We started off with these workshops as well, which really helped clarify leadership and understand the challenges that they were facing in order to sort of set the foundation for how they transform the brand in the future. Next, we're going to review where the brand was in its previous iteration. The brand had actually had three previous brand designs done for it. So I think three agencies had come in previously and tried to sort of brand the company. I think where it left was sort of an amalgamation of all of those efforts. So we're going to get into right now, obviously, an overview of where they were. A couple of the issues that we had around changing things and the opportunity in changing those things as well. So first off, the logo type. So this is where they previously were. The client was quite hesitant around moving from the original symbol. There was a lot of brand equity in it. So what we actually did was guided them towards embracing a sort of refreshed approach to the symbol. We also, the logo type was totally up for grabs, so we could totally change that. There was a little bit of curling issue, which I can't not see now between the two E's that like really just keeps me up at night. I can't lie. So we wanted to get a hold of it, just really give it a nice refresh spin. So to get more into the symbol, this is actually the original brand symbol that the company had, which is on the left-hand side here. You'll see on the right-hand side, there's this sort of infinity loop. So that is actually the DevOps symbol. So DevOps is essentially what these guys do. They're in the sort of DevOps space. That is what the whole system is. And the DevOps symbol, they actually based the CloudBees symbol, which is their brand, on this. So they had a lot of equity in it. They wanted to sort of keep the infinity loop because it felt like DevOps, and it essentially was what they wanted to not move away from. However, we thought that there was some opportunity to really upgrade it, increase the legibility. So we sort of shepherded them towards this updated version, which I'll get into in sort of a little bit. But just so you guys can get a bit of context around obviously why it was so important to them, the equity that was built into it. From there as well, we look at illustrations, so just an overview of what they were using on the website. So they use illustrations to sort of really highlight some esoteric things on the website, very process-driven things. They were open from the start to really introducing a new illustration system. And we thought that the existing style was a little bit cartoonish for where they were, and it wasn't necessarily appropriate in representing this sort of cutting-edge technology solution that they wanted to move towards. And the market audit also highlighted the need for a very distinctive approach to stand out in the industry. There's a lot of companies using very similar illustration styles out there in the sort of DevOps space, and we saw that as one of the key areas where we could easily differentiate and just elevate their business. From there, we've got the man of the hour. So this was the brand mascot, Jenkins. He's essentially what I imagine to be a British butler who's been hitting the gym a little bit too much. So Jenkins is actually a personification of a popular DevOps tool, which is actually what CloudBees is based upon. So it essentially manages and controls several stages the software delivery process, including build documentation, automated testing, packaging, and static code analysis. So the Jenkins mascot was essentially a massive, massive part of the brand and something the client desperately wanted to get away from in its current antiquated format. I say desperately wanted to get away from because the way Jenkins worked for the company was that you had to actually be on premises to sort of instill the software and get it to work for a company. Now, what they were moving towards was a much more cloud-based operation. So Jenkins sort of represented that more antiquated way of working, and they wanted to get away from it as much as possible to really shepherd in this new era. Here you can just see how, Jenkins turns up in a variety of formats. We've got him there as the world heavyweight champion in the top left. He's obviously been hitting the gym, taking his protein shakes. We've got him as a caricature of himself, which is the butler. So he's basically the brand mascot. He's the butler. He helps you get what you need out of the software. He's almost like the paperclip from Microsoft Word, if you remember that guy, Clippy. He was always there. You never wanted him there. That's what Jenkins essentially is. So you can see him in sort of his various iterations here. So this is what we want to get away from. He also folds into that sort of illustration style, which we thought was a little bit too cartoonish, and you can sort of see here how that could be a problem when we're trying to talk about tech and innovation. Feels very sort of the last 10 years in terms of aesthetic, so we wanted to desperately get out of that. From there, we're just going to have a little overview of the website and where it was. So within our sort of brand audit, I'll just give you a quick scroll through so you can see the illustrations, the typography, the color really coming into play. So this is where they were previously. As you can see, the illustrations are sort of super cartoonish. They're very sort of childlike in essence, and we wanted to sort of move them away from that and give them a really new, updated brand that felt much more innovative for where they are. They're a big player in this sector. They've almost got a $1 billion estimation, I believe, and I think they're just progressing to get better and better. So we really needed to sort of understand how we could differentiate, and the website was a huge part of that. When we've sort of done a market audit, we've seen that it shares a lot of similarities with a lot of other sites and is obviously one of the main key things. Like if you're in tech, you're going to be going straight to their website, essentially to understand what they do and to, really look at that value proposition across the marketplace to understand who's the best DevOps operator to go for. In that instance, what we need to do is really create some ownership in the space. So just dial into color as well. So previously, the brand used a really widespread sort of color palette. There was a primary blue, which they had a lot of equity in, and they wanted to retain that. So you see on the left-hand side here, I've sort of heroed that there. And then essentially what we wanted to do was keep that blue. We wanted to dial it up a little bit and then introduce a sort of gradient to evolve the palette. So that's what we've kind of done. We've moved it away from being so widespread and we've made it more deliberate. So we've sort of moved some of the colors from the secondary accents into our sort of our tertiary accents in the new updated brand. And this sort of shift really enhances the brand distinctiveness while preserving user familiarity. So those people that have come onto the site previously still understand it's CloudBees, still understand the equity within the blue and the purples and the accent colors, but all we've done is really just elevated it. But I'll get into that in a little bit when we go over our roots. And from there, the opportunity. So, what exactly was the opportunity for the brand? Where were these points where they could easily differentiate and innovate within the sector? So, our main thing that we needed to get out here was that they need to transition from a legacy brand to a modern DevOps innovator. And now, how do we do that? So, a bit of an overview for you guys about the opportunity here. As cloud technologies advance and customers embrace hybrid and diverse environments, CloudBees had to move beyond its antiquated Jenkins roots to become an innovative, strategic partner in enterprise cloud transformation, really bridging the gap between traditional systems with modern cloud native solutions. Essentially, what this means is we wanted to move them away from the antiquated past where you had to be on premises to really instill the software into a cloud-based operator. That was a transition we were helping them make. And the opportunity here was for Motto to craft a brand that really supported that vision, differentiated to assert themselves as an industry leader, and really redefine how CloudBees is perceived in the marketplace. A couple of the key competitors, nothing shy of the real industry leaders here. So we have Harness, GitLab, and GitHub, which I'm sure you've all heard of in some context. Now, these are the players we're up against. So we really needed that market audit to give us some super straightforward key things in which we could make distinction on. So from there, what we do, I spoke about this previously, is with every sort of project we get here at Motto, we provide the client with two possible futures. So I'm going to get into those and I'm going to really outline exactly what that means for the client. So, creative strategies are a very important first step in establishing the path for a brand's visual and verbal style. We deal with this every day. Like aesthetics can be super subjective, and this step essentially aligns our thinking with the client from the onset. So every project we create mood boards that express the strategy of the project, each showing examples of things like symbols, typography, color, graphic cues, and art direction, based on this key idea worth rallying around. So that idea worth rallying around bleeds into every single touch point of the brand that we show the client. The chosen board that they go with then sort of guides the development, and it's a very close extension of that original mood board. So without further ado, I think a lot of you may have seen the project online in its final iteration. Now, what we really want to do is just get on the cutting floor, show you guys a little behind the scenes of obviously some of the route that didn't actually make it and a little behind the scenes of what went into making the route that did. So I'm going to get into it now. So this was idea one that we actually provided the client with. It was called the Swarm. So super interesting way of presenting this idea of CloudBees to the client. Um, this concept draws inspiration from a swarm of bees working together as a unified entity. It also symbolizes the all-in-one nature of the CloudBees platform. So the CloudBees platform, just a little bit of context here, guys, is basically an all-in-one system that allows you to go in and manage all of your DevOps in one singular place. We sort of relayed back to the idea that bees work in a hive, and it was really something that intrigued us. So this swarm graphic essentially that overarches the entire brand identity would dynamically transform raw code into a visual asset, and it essentially forms the core identity of the brand in real time. So what we've created is almost like a dynamic, living, breathing hive as a graphic for the brand going forward. And this is what this is all based on. So it was this hive graphic that could essentially really fall into every single touch point of the brand. What I'm going to show you guys next is just a brief video overview of how this actually came out and how it was relayed back to the client. So we can see the swarm here and see how it bleeds into sort of every single touch point of the brand. This iteration was very sort of animated, very dynamic, and really just sort of revolutionized where they were as a company. Just to get into things, so you can see the hive really coming into play on the website. This sort of swarm idea really shows how code can be an actual visual asset for the brand. We can see it fold into illustration on the left-hand side here, where we were with illustration in the previous iteration of the brand, very cartoonish, very caricature-esque. And what we've done here is really simplified that and actually created a tool and a way for us to create an endless amount of graphics using typography. As you can see on the left-hand side here, this is all about security, so really protecting the data in the core. And on the right-hand side, you can just see a little iteration of the sort of mobile website. From there, you can see an updated version of the symbol. So what we've done is give them a very much more modernized iteration of where they were, slightly tilted at 45 degrees, and much more in a revolutionary style. As from where they were, as you can see here. So we've actually sort of accentuated those gaps that they had previously in the symbol and presented it to them in an all new way, as you can see on the right-hand side. This was the symbol we actually proposed to the client. From there, just seeing how that all comes into play in an advertising sense, we've gone for can't even say photographic, you know what I mean? Sometimes you just fumble yourself. Photographic direction on the right-hand side here, you can see really heroes the user in a very much flow state. From there, we've got a look at sort of illustration and iconography that we put together, which is based on the geometry of the actual symbol itself. So a lot of those cuts, a lot of those gaps, and a lot of those angles are sort of formulated into the actual icon system as well. So this is the route that the client chose, and we're going to get into a little bit of the background about exactly how it came to be. B is actually a good pun. How it came to be. And we're going to get into it. So without further ado, guys, we really wanted our clients to see the world of DevOps through a very fresh perspective. Um, I'm not going to lie, we spent about a week just researching bees for this project. Sounds crazy, but sometimes there's a method to the madness. So we literally all just stood on Google. We were looking at, what makes bees unique, hence the swarm idea. But something that was really, really interesting to us, and I'm going to get a little bit like David Attenborough right now for you guys that are fans. Bees actually see the world in ultraviolet. So the way they actually see pollen and scope it out is that their vision allows them to see that as almost highlighted against the grayscale. So this ultraviolet vision is how bees make the decisions they do. So they essentially use it as an indicator to seek out pollen and make calculated decisions. Now, this actually echoes to the CloudBees system as well. And that's what CloudBees allows you to do is see sort of a highlight of the errors and the cautionary things that would potentially make code fail. So there's a bit of a link there, and we thought that, we could potentially bridge that gap using a visual system. So our creative workshop also exposed purple and pinks as part of the color space that could help us stand out. Now, what we actually did was look into a sort of ultraviolet spectrum. So we've brought that a lot into the color space, obviously from the bees vision narrative. And to sort of create a natural evolution, we wanted to use our current brand asset for graphic inspiration, but combine it with this totally new way to see the world in ultraviolet vision. This gives us sort of a natural progression in the brand system, but allows for a look and feel and ownability that really expands our presence in the marketplace. So a little bit about what that actually means. So all this research on Google about bees actually led to something really, really interesting that we could relay back to the client and actually build an idea on, which was crazy to us. So inspired by the way that bees perceive ultraviolet light to uncover the sort of hidden patterns in nature, the CloudBees project really drew from this concept to craft its vibrant color palette and design system that, reveals those critical issues and insights that you would otherwise just miss. We really illuminate the unseen for a clearer, more informed perspective. So we've actually figured out something in nature that relates back to obviously the name of the company, and we've folded that into how the business actually works. It was sort of a very natural thing that happened. And when we started to play around with it and really use it, it started to make so much sense. So here you can sort of see a visual representation, which we've got on the case study right now, of what a sort of human sees, which is the visible light, and what a bee would see. So it's the UV spectrum, really heroing and showing how that actually works, which is super interesting. And then we've updated the logo type as well. So you'll see it's come away from where obviously previously was in its initial iteration, and it's been really redesigned to sort of harmonize with the symbol and create a really modern and refined feel. We've actually based this on the typeface FT Sterling, which was sort of chosen for its friendliness and its modern tendencies. The new logo really conveys this much more approachable and contemporary image, really complementing the updated symbol very effectively. So a little bit about what we did with the logo type, 'cause you might just be thinking, well, they've just typed it out. Well, no, we haven't. So we've refined all the letter forms, we've matched the stems throughout, we've optically adjusted the crossbars, all that good stuff. And we've also introduced very custom letter forms as well. You'll see there's a little gap in that B there, and that is obviously a correlation to the symbol they have. Those two things matched together just pair beautifully well. Now, a little bit about the symbol. So you might be thinking, well, there's not really been much done there. However, let me inform you. So before actually engaging with us, CloudBees customers and partners really highlighted that the C and the B in their initial logo wasn't really that recognizable. Everyone really struggled to actually read what it was. So in response, we try to really refine the logo and enhance it for clarity, maintaining obviously the DevOps symbol iteration that they really wanted to keep and they had equity in. And what we did was just ensure that across any sort of scale, the legibility was always there. So here you can sort of see a side by side of that legibility increase from the original to the proposed. So we've sort of changed those gaps from being a little bit fiddly. We have like a 45-degree, and then we've got these sort of 90 degrees that sit in the middle on the left-hand side. They don't really match. I think that really like annoyed a lot of us during this process. We were like, why aren't they matching? Doesn't make any sense. So we wanted to just like get rid of that, ensure its uniformity, and then just, really blow it up so that it's much more scalable varying sizes. Like for a favicon, getting down to like 15 pixels, this works. Whereas the other one, people had a lot of issues with the legibility, especially at smaller scales. From there, just to look at how that logo actually comes to be in our sort of UV spectrum. And then we're going to get into, which is probably my favorite part of the project, is the color. So a little overview of the color palette. So our core palette is formed through sort of a set of dark tints ranging from our darkest black to our cleanest white. This blue has been taken over from the previous iteration and we bumped it to much more of a digital blue. So it's sort of had a little bit of a makeover ever so slightly, but we still sort of retain the equity from the previous round of branding. We've then also brought in our ultraviolet gradient, which you can see in the right-hand side here, to really represent the vision of bees and embody the idea of seeing the world from a new perspective. So that is sort of the core of the color palette. We've really expanded out the grayscale as well, just for like user interface purposes, because we feel like with a sort of more tighter grayscale palette, monochromatic, you always sort of like falter when you're actually trying to put it into play. So this just gives us a lot more scope, ensures that contrast checking's been done, all that good stuff, and it's just much more usable by the team that's actually going to be, putting this into play at CloudBees. From there as well, we created a sort of secondary set of colors, looking at the spectrum of colors within the ultraviolet range. So we've really brought those to the forefront. And from these, we can essentially select colors that pair with our core palette, which works really, really well for smaller applications like graphs. We can really highlight key things. As I said before, this is all about highlighting sort of awareness within the system, much as a bee's vision would work in ultraviolet. And again, we've also got an accent palette to support the both primary and secondary colors. We've built out a range of accent colors. There was a few of these actually in the previous round of rounding. Round of browning? Wow. Brand previous round of Brandon that they really liked and there was a lot of equity in. But what we wanted to do is make them more purposeful. So we brought them forward in a sort of accent color pack. And it really just allows us again to sort of hero those key alerts within the system. They can be used for like notifications when things have gone wrong. This is how we really use them and get the most out of them and actually relay back to that key core idea. From there, you can just see the sort of color spectrum in use on the left-hand side there. That is the full spectrum of color we've got. You can also see how it sort of starts to bleed into a little bit of the website UI design there. The sort of monochromatic palette really setting the tone for the user interface and that gradient just coming in beautifully to sort of sell it. From there, we're going to look at our new illustration style. So the illustration style that we proposed is essentially born from our core brand assets. It's representative of the breaks from the symbol and the logo type. So you'd all seen that. We've then formed that into this dotted line that really prefaces all the illustration work. And we use the notion of a bee's vision again and the ultraviolet gradient as an indicator to sort of highlight important information within the system. So you'll see that gradient also come into play here. So paired with the core brand colors and the ultraviolet gradient, we can essentially create an endless supply of simple illustrations that help us really convey those more complex ideas within the brand. So what we've done is really set them up with a toolkit that they can go ahead and make whatever illustrations they need out of. And it really just updates the brand in a much more modern sense. From there, you can just sort of see all of those elements coming together. So we've got how the illustration plays into things, how that accent palette comes into play on the bottom there, and how infographics have been re-engineered to sort of move them ahead. Also, we've got a nice bit of the iconography in the right-hand side there, which you may see with the little clock spinning around right now. Those symbol breaks, again, have all been brought from the symbol, moved across from there, and really, fully fledged into all the sort of aspects of the brand. From here, we can really see how the illustrations become a much bigger part of the brand. Previously, as I showed you on the website, they were using to sort of explain things that were a little bit hard to understand. Here, we can really blow that up and actually use it as a much more visual touch point for the brand. You can see it here again on the website as a sort of hero. It plays a huge role in the new website we crafted for the team. It really creates a sort of differentiated website that really stands out on the marketplace using this new illustration style, the ultraviolet, and all the sort of touches we've made to just slightly update the brand from where it was and just bring it into its new era. And then without further ado, I'm going to get into an overview of those two boards we just spoke about. So you've seen obviously a little bit of the cutting room floor from the first iteration we presented to the client, and obviously the route that they went forward with. So just an overview of that. Both routes are inspired by this idea of the bee's nature. One is by obviously the swarm on the left-hand side, this idea that bees collectively come together to, essentially get to the greater good, which is what the CloudBees all-in-one system did. So we found a nice correlation there as well. And then the other by obviously the bee's vision, which allows you to really see in depth and understand what's going wrong with code, and obviously relays back to how a bee actually sees the world. So two really interesting connotations there. Fun fact as well. I am dropping a fun fact. I'm that guy. Fun fact as well. CloudBees, the name, they were actually thinking about it in its initial instance, and they were going like through a lot of back and forth in terms of what the name could be. But the name was actually came up with by one of the founder's daughters. She mentioned like it should just be CloudBees. I don't know why, and it just suddenly stuck. So it actually came from one of the founder's daughters, which is super interesting. But what's actually made them is a very standout brand. I mean, there's nothing like it in the industry, and what we've really done is just help them get behind that and really blow it up and own who they are. So I think it's a super interesting project. Really love working on it. But here you can sort of see those two routes that we propose to the client. So those two possible futures. Obviously, both based around this idea worth rallying around of seeing the world through sort of a bee's eyes. Super interesting way of seeing things. And I don't think there's anyone in the DevOps sector that could even possibly come up with this. So here we are. So on the left, the Swarm. It's all built around sort of this idea of a bee swarm, togetherness, much more revolutionary. And on the right-hand side, this idea of a bee's perspective, which is obviously seeing things from a new perspective. It's much more innovative, and the client saw this as more of an evolution. When it actually came to it, guys, so I'm going to just get into the nitty-gritty of what happened here because I know that's what you're all here for. So the client obviously went for route two, which is the right-hand side, a bee's perspective. They thought they absolutely loved the initial idea of the swarm, but they thought it might have been a little bit too cool for where they were. They saw it as much more of a revolution as opposed to an evolution, hence why we shifted to the right hand side. But a lot of the sort of narrative and the understanding behind the idea we built into Route One, they absolutely loved. So I think it was a very tough decision for the client. We also agreed that Route Two felt a little bit more like a natural evolution. I feel like Route One would have been just pushing them where they weren't ready to go just yet. However, both routes created a lot of differentiation in the industry. We're super happy with obviously where they've gone. I think the brand in totality has just really come full circle. We absolutely love seeing it in the wild. They've got sort of cars in Vegas now that are driving around with the brand on. Super interesting. They've been at like Times Square on the Nasdaq board. It's just lovely to see that sort of ultraviolet gradient coming through all of these sort of touch points that they've, really applied the brand to. Super interesting. And obviously, just one of our favorite brands from 2024. It's an absolute pleasure to work on. And guys, that's pretty much an overview of obviously the entire creative process, a little bit about us, who we are, and obviously the sort of issues that we had with the client and the opportunities that there were to really differentiate them in the space. So as I said, the two options that we obviously presented to the client in the first instance, and you guys obviously all know where the brand ended up, which is this beautiful ultraviolet sort of modern update to where they were, which truly differentiates them in the space.